Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Brewer's Minute. So this week, I want to take a few minutes and talk about one of the most classic Magic sayings, and that is, it dies to removal, or dies to Doomblade. So this is something you hear come up all the time when people are debating how playable or unplayable a creature happens to be. Some people think, oh, if it dies to Doomblade, which consider Doomblade a stand-in for some of the most popular removal spells in a format. Because Doomblade obviously is in standard, but some people think if it dies to Doomblade, then it's just unplayable. Other people think, this argument's overblown, everything dies to some removal, people make too big of a deal out of it. So today, we're going to take some time to look at standard, identify the Doomblades of our current Aether Revolt standard, and talk a little bit about how they impact our deck building choices and how much dying to Doomblade actually matters. Hopefully by the end of it, we will have some information that will help us make better card selection choices as we're building our deck, and in the end, have better decks altogether. So, a quick reminder before we break it all down, if you enjoy Brewer's Minute and the other series here on the channel, it would be amazing of you if you could take a quick second, click that subscribe button down in the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So, the crux of the dies to Doomblade argument can be seen in Thragtusk and Ghoultree. So, for this example, let's assume Ghoultree costs 5 mana, because you got some creatures in your graveyard. If you were going to choose one of these creatures to play, and you knew your opponent had a Doomblade, which one would you want? You'd probably go with the Thragtusk, because the Thragtusk, even if it immediately dies to Doomblade, as soon as you cast it, before your opponent even untaps, they just kill it, you're still getting something out of the deal. 5 life and a 3/3 beast token. On the other hand, Ghoultree, while a 10/10 for 5 mana sounds pretty absurd, and it's huge, and it closes out the game way quicker than the 5/3 Thragtusk, if your opponent just Doomblades it, you get nothing out of the deal. So that's kind of the crux of the argument, but it even goes beyond enter the battlefield triggers, and those are part of the argument. If you're choosing between creatures of similar power, but one does something immediately, and one requires you to wait and untap with it, most of the time the one that does something immediately is going to be better, because of removal, and because you get some value out of it even if it dies. But it even matters for creatures that don't really do anything when they enter the battlefield. So the first thing we need to do is identify the Doomblades of Standard. And in Standard, we have essentially 3 Doomblades. The 3 best removal spells, most played removal spells in the format: Fatal Push, Harness Lightning, and Shock. So Fatal Push is number 1. It's in like 81% of decks. Harness Lightning is at like 40%, but it's almost always a 4 of. Shock is pushing at 50%. So these are the removal spells that are going to impact our card choices as we're building Standard decks. Whether you buy the dies to Doomblade argument or not, you at least want to be thinking about these cards while you're picking creatures. So here's an easy example. It wasn't that long ago that Grimflayer was one of the top 5, I think, creatures in Standard. It was so dominant, you play it on turn 2, you really pressure your opponent, it grows to a 4/4. Right now, it's almost out of the top 50 most played cards in Standard. So what's the reason for this decline? And basically, it dies to all the Doomblades. Fatal Push kills it all the time. Harness Lightning all the time. Shock all the time. Everything kills a Grimflayer. So before Fatal Push and Shock, the worst case was you'd play a Grimflayer, your opponent would have to spend 2 mana to Harness Lightning or Grasp of Darkness it. If they didn't have one of those cards, you were immediately way ahead. Now you can play a Grimflayer, and your opponent, even if they are on the draw, can just play a land, Fatal Push, or Shock, and you get nothing for your 2 mana investment. So that's why Grimflayer has kind of moved down the rankings, and Grimflayer is an example of a card that just lines up so poorly with the Doomblades of the format, it's really gotten hurt by it. You would think that with green-black being one of the most popular color combinations, and Grimflayer having an easy home in those decks, it would see a lot more play, but in this case, dying to removal really is kind of pushing a otherwise powerful card out of the format. On the other hand, we have Winding Constrictor, which also dies to some of the Doomblades, but not quite as many as Grimflayer. So it does die to Fatal Push, no matter what, even without Revolt. It does die to Harness Lightning. It does not die to Shock, though, which is a kind of big deal. And as a result, Winding Constrictor, even though it doesn't do anything right away, it has no enter the battlefield abilities, it kind of got to sit out there to really generate much value, is a very heavily played and very powerful card. So while Grimflayer matches up just so poorly with the Doomblades, it's almost unplayable. I'm using that loosely. It's not unplayable, but it's much less playable than it was. Winding Constrictor, let's call it neutral. You're not going to actively put Winding Constrictor in your deck because it matches up so well with removal, but you're not going to keep it out of your deck because of the removal either. On the other hand, some cards line up so well with the removal of the format, you really want them in your deck. And for me, that card right now is Aethersphere Harvester. So Aethersphere Harvester does not die to Fatal Push, does not die to Shock. It maybe sometimes dies to Harness Lightning, but not even all the time. It just lines up super well because it's 3 mana to dodge some removal, it's 5 toughness to dodge other removal. So this is an example of a card that really benefits from the Doomblades of the format, and the way it lines up with the removal is an active positive. Like, that's a reason I want Aethersphere Harvester in my deck. If I'm choosing between Aethersphere Harvester and another option, the fact that it dodges so much of the most heavily played removal in the format is the tiebreaker for me. And I will want to find a place for it in my deck specifically for this reason. Not to mention the fact that it's awesome at blocking and taking care of Heart of Kirin, which is another huge benefit. So the bottom line is there is relevance and importance and validity to the argument of dying to Doomblade. We've seen that in our discussion. There are examples, like Grimflayer, that just die to too much removal, so they're kind of bad for your deck. There are also examples of cards that line up great with the removal, so you want them in the deck, and then there's a huge chunk of cards in the middle, like Winding Constrictor. So the point of all this is, as you are building your decks, you want to be aware of the heavily played removal in the format. And as you are making your card selections, and as you are building your deck, you want to try to avoid cards that are really, really bad against those removal spells. While this isn't the be-all and end-all, and the only factor in your deck building, you should consider this in these small edges of dropping cards that just don't line up well with the format, don't line up well with the removal, adding in a couple cards that do line up really well with the removal. Over the course of building tons of decks, playing tons of games, these are going to give you small edges over your opponents who might not be thinking this way in their deck building process. Anyway, that's been our Brewers Minute for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.